Hi, Victober is over and this is my reading wrap-up for this month. Katie's challenge was to read a Victorian book that equates to your favorite modern genre. I don't have a favorite modern genre, so I just picked 3 novels from 3 different genres. The first one is a historical fiction, A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. It is set during the French Revolution in London and Paris. It has been on my list for 10 years. I wanted to read it, but at the same time, I was afraid that it wouldn't match my expectations. You see, history was one of my favorite subjects in school, and French Revolution was one of my favorite periods. You can say that I had great expectations for this novel. The first chapter is simply perfect. I cannot express how much I appreciate Dickens's opening chapters. He was so good at intriguing his readers. Imagine not finishing a book where you can see what the author is capable of, where he shows off his skills right from the beginning. I don't envy people who have to summarize or write a synopsis for this novel. It has so many details. I'll just introduce you to 2 of the main characters. A young woman, Lucy, finds out that her father isn't actually dead. He's been imprisoned in Bastille for many years, and now they are reunited. Another character, Charles Darnay, is a French aristocrat who moves to England because he doesn't like the way French noblemen act. He may or may not be a traitor. You'll find the answer in the court scene. The characters felt a bit cartoonish. There's no nuance to them. They're either good or bad, most of them at least. The story focuses on the crowds rather than individuals. You'll see the revolution from the author's point of view, and he's not subtle with his opinions. It seems that the book implies that England is better than France because it's more stable and safe. I have a rhetorical question that may sound stupid, but why is it called A Tale of Two Cities? I know that the action takes place in the 2 cities, but is it enough to justify the title? It's nice, it has a ring to it, but it doesn't fit. It's not like London and Paris are characters in the novel, the way that the house or the castle is a character in Gothic fiction. It seems that London or England is the standard, and Paris or France is the deviation. There are things that I actually enjoyed. One of them doesn't give away any plot twists and is also historically accurate. 2 characters have to shop in different stores because they don't want others to see how much money they have. Everyone is afraid of their neighbors, and everyone is spying on everyone. Another thing I enjoyed was the whole resurrection theme. People can escape from inescapable situations, and true identities can be discovered. In a way, a country is resurrected after a revolution if it was successful. I don't regret reading this book, but it would be hard for me to recommend it to you. The next book I read was North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. It's about industrialization and its effects on people. Margaret Hale's father, the local pastor, decides to leave the church and move from the south of England to an industrial town in the north. He doesn't tell his wife about it because apparently she has no say. Instead, he makes Margaret do it. And thus Margaret becomes a sort of mother figure. She wants to solve everyone's problems, and frankly, she holds herself responsible for too many things. In the south, she was surrounded by nature, and Milton, the place they moved to, is very different. It's industrialized, so she sees many workers there and becomes aware of the class struggle. Unfortunately, the first chapters when they're in the south were my favorite ones. Margaret seemed like the perfect lead, but as the novel progressed, I kinda lost my interest. She's probably one of the most independent female characters I encountered in Victorian literature, but she's not that interesting as a person, and I didn't care for her love-hate relationship, the whole love story. The characters are realistic, and some parts of the book are very well written. I actually enjoyed Margaret's interactions with her mother, for instance. The social commentary was exactly what I expected, but either North and South lacks the emotional intensity and depth, or I failed to see them. I enjoyed the BBC adaptation though. Another book I read for this challenge was The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. Walter Hartwright is employed as an art teacher. On his last night in London, he meets a mysterious woman in white and helps her to catch a cab. Then he finds out that she escaped from a mental asylum. The title character has some connection to the people he is working for, but I'm not going to spoil it. Walter falls in love with his student Laura, only to discover that she's already engaged. Laura has a half-sister Marion, who actually has a personality and point of view chapters. This was my first sensation novel. The plot is elaborate to the point of becoming unrealistic. The good part is that it's not supposed to be realistic. I'm guessing that the author focused on the plot more than character development because the characters are very black and white. I love the way the story is told. It's very ambitious since it includes forgery, conspiracy, illegitimacy, and insanity. It's written from different perspectives, my favorite one being Marion's, obviously. The book discusses gender roles quite a lot for its time. The women's interests weren't protected in Victorian England. The two sisters have guardians even though they're old enough to be responsible for themselves and their finances. The main complaint I have is that Wilkie Collins was too generous with the clues he gave me. I figured out 2 twists, including the biggest one, which happens near the end. In the first 50 pages, it could have been so much more intriguing. Another thing that bugged me was the fact that the secrets were advertised as mind-blowing, and they were just, I guess they were shocking for the 19th century, but now not so much. Kate's challenge was to read a new-to-you book by your favorite Victorian author. I like Oscar Wilde. I visited his tomb last year, so I picked Lord Arthur Saville's Crime and Other Stories. My collection also includes some of his fairy tales, so I'll mention only the ones I enjoyed. Lord Arthur Saville's Crime is about the title character who meets a palmist at a party. The man tells him that he can see that he will kill someone. Lord Arthur decides to fulfill his destiny before his wedding, and it is surprisingly hard to do. The next one is a fairy tale, The Fisherman and His Soul. One day, a fisherman catches a mermaid, and she begs him to let her go. She promises that she will come back and sing for him whenever he calls her. The fisherman agrees and falls in love with her, but they can't be together because the fisherman has a soul. The rest of the story is practically a morality tale. It's interesting that a man who said that there's no such thing as a moral or an immoral book wrote this. Don't get me wrong, you can appreciate it solely for its aesthetic merits. It also has something in common with Andersen's fairy tales, and not because of the mermaid. The next one, The Canterville Ghost, is about an American family who buys an English manor even though it's rumored to be haunted. They see a bloodstain in one of the rooms, and apparently it's the blood of Lady Canterville, who has been murdered by her husband a long time ago. The bloodstain reappears there every day, and every day it's removed with Pinkerton's Champion Stain Remover. The symbolism is very obvious here. Perhaps there is a ghost there, and he's trying so hard to scare them, but his efforts are in vain. It's such a sentimental story about a ghost who cannot fulfill his purpose in a pragmatic world. It's both comedic and dramatic, and it's great for readers of all ages. The next challenge was to read a Victorian book from your previous Victober TBR that you didn't get to or that you've been meaning to read for years. And I picked The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. You probably know what this novella is about. A lawyer, Mr. Utterson, is in charge of Dr. Jekyll's will. Jekyll leaves everything to a mysterious Mr. Hyde, and Utterson wants to discover what's the nature of the relationship between these two men. Mr. Hyde doesn't have the best reputation. I knew the plot before reading it, but it was such an enjoyable experience nevertheless. Somehow it was mysterious, even though I knew all the answers. It was so well written. The line, "If you shall be Mr. Hyde, I shall be Mr. Seek," it's so cringy and iconic at the same time. The question is, what do you do with the parts of yourself that you dislike? With the parts rejected by society? With your disgusting instincts? Do you suppress them in hope that they will go away? Well, usually what you resist persists. And if you want to work on them, how do you do that? Do you reward yourself when you're a good boy and get punished when you're bad? And if you decide to unleash the Kraken, are you ready to take responsibility for your actions? And if you want to go beyond these polarities, how do you face this bad person in a non-judgmental way? And how do you help them? How can good and evil coexist? Though I think that I would have enjoyed it more if I read it 10 years earlier, since it's so, I'm sorry, but the word basic comes to mind. It's a surprisingly thought-provoking book. I revisited my ideas on morality, not because of the book, but because of my perception of it. And I discovered that I still tend to be moralizing, especially when it comes to me. I still have this unattainable ideal self, and the striking contrast between her and me is really frustrating. The next book I read was The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. Many people love this book and say that it deserves more attention than it gets. For some reason, it's less popular than the works of Charlotte and Emily. The title character moves to a rural community with her son. A young man, Gilbert, falls in love with her. She's very mysterious and goes against Victorian norms. He is intrigued by her and wants to discover her secret, but at the same time he tries to protect her from the gossip in town. The second part is Helen's diary, where she tells her story and explains what led her to move to Wildfell Hall. You gotta have huge ovaries to tell this kind of story in Victorian England, and I appreciate the effort and the title character. I didn't like the novel though. I hate saying this, but it felt kind of outdated. I can enjoy books written hundreds of years ago, but this wasn't the case. The plot makes more sense than the one of Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights. It certainly has just as much potential, but everything was so predictable for the same reason that it was shocking back when it was published. It was obviously a protest against conventions of Victorian society. I enjoyed Helen's point of view like most readers. It is so personal and touching, and she addresses one of the biggest problems of that time. I like the structure, the pacing isn't too slow, the characters are well written, just not my cup of tea. It could inspire some readers to leave a situation, be that a relationship or a job that isn't fulfilling, to do their own thing instead of following the rules, instead of tolerating the toxicity. So I wouldn't discourage anyone from reading it. The next book, Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, was one of the first pieces of vampire fiction. Laura and her father live in a castle somewhere in Austria. They're isolated and the atmosphere is very gloomy. A carriage crashes somewhere in the neighborhood. Everyone is fine, but a young woman is unconscious. Her mother leaves her with Laura and her father because she's in a hurry. The young woman, Carmilla, gets better and becomes friends with Laura. She doesn't act the way a Victorian woman was supposed to. She sleeps until noon, she locks her door at night, and she's affectionate towards Laura. I wanted to read just a couple of paragraphs, and I ended up reading the whole novella in one go. So if you're intimidated by big, dense novels with many characters and many details to keep in mind, you might enjoy it. It's very straightforward, and autumn is the best time of the year to read vampire books, so go ahead. It's predictable, but it's not its fault. It's just that these tropes are so overused by now that you know what to expect. If you don't take it too seriously, you will have fun. The next novel, The Warden by Anthony Trollope, is the first part of the Chronicles of Barsetshire. I don't think there's any point in giving you a synopsis because you'll think that it's the most boring thing ever. All I can say is that the worst part about this novel is that it's too short. There's nothing surprising about it. It's not the most exciting read. Not too many characters, not too many things happening. It's just a simple, banal story told in the most perfect way. Reading it was such a relaxing experience for some reason. I have no idea how Trollope seduced me, but I want to read the rest of the series. I also read Pushkin's Little Tragedies, but I talked about them in my Pushkin Where to Start video. Do you have any recommendations for my next Victober? If so, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Bye!